Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some easy interference ink techniques using the color combination of the month for Lisa Horton Crafts for June 2026. So we have 3 interference ink pads here that I'm going to be using. I have Summer Garden, Sweet Treat, and Tropical Paradise. And if you haven't seen interference ink pads before, they're like 2 ink pads in one. They have one color that shows up on light or bright cardstock and a completely different color that shows up on black or dark cardstock. I'm going to be using these with the Bows and Smiles die set as well as the Weather Grid stamp set. Now to start off, I'm using some mixed media Heavystock to create a distress style background with the interference inks. I'm going to be using mostly the Sweet Treat and Summer Garden. I'll add just a touch of Tropical Paradise on the sides. I'm going to be having this flower as the main focus, so I don't want a ton of that Tropical Paradise on the background. I want to just coordinate it in with the flower. I also think that if I have too much of that Tropical Paradise with that Summer Garden, we're going to kind of create some mud. So I'm focusing on the yellow and green, and I'll have just a tiny little bit of pink on some of the edges. Now we are working with the mixed media Heavystock. This is light colored cardstock. So we're going to be seeing the colors that show up on the light cardstock, but we will get to see some of the colors that show up on the dark cardstock later on in the video. So once I have the ink smushed on my media mat here, I'm using a Tim Holtz media mat on my surface. I mist it with some water and I dip my cardstock in there. Then I'm using a heated tool to dry it. The heated tool emits some heat, but it's really gentle. It's great for drying mediums. I want this about 80–90% dry. I want it mostly dry. Some of the areas that are wet will mix in with the liquid ink that is on my surface if I dip it in while it's wet. But if I make most of it dry, we're going to start layering ink on top and we get some really nice texture on that background. So it just really depends on the look that you're going for. If you want to have more layers, you want it drier. If you want them to blend in together more, you can leave it a little bit more on the wet side. Now, typically I speed up this part of the video because it's fairly repetitive, but I have it showing in real time so you can see exactly how long it takes. This card comes together really quite quickly. The thing that takes the longest is really this background, and it's more the drying time than the actual dipping and creating the background, but it's so worth it because of the interesting backgrounds that you can create, and you'll never get 2 of them that are exactly the same. You can use the same colors and you'll always get backgrounds that look completely different. Now, because we are using interference inks for this, in some of the areas where those inks are heaviest, we're going to get deposits of that interference shimmer. So we're going to be able to see a little bit of shimmer in some of the different areas where those inks are heavier. We're not going to see it all over the background. Another option for this, if you don't have interference ink pads, is using a water reactive ink pad like Distress Inks and adding a little bit of mica powder like Perfect Pearls. You can get a similar-ish look to it, but it still doesn't look exactly the same as interference inks. They're really quite unique and have their own unique look to them. Now I just took a paper towel and I just sopped it or pressed it into some of the larger blobs of ink that I had on my surface, because at this point I want smaller drops of ink. I want to be layering it on top and I don't want larger areas. So if you have some larger areas where you don't want them to be, you can easily take a piece of paper towel and just suck up that ink from the surface to create the background that you're wanting. As we keep going, we're going to have less and less moisture on the mat. So the inks are going to be a little bit drier. They're going to create smaller splotches or dots than when we first created. When we first dipped it in there, there was a lot of water there. We got the color all over the background. These next layers are just adding that extra little bit of texture. So when I dipped it into that Tropical Paradise, I had that Tropical Paradise over to the side and I just did it on the edges of the paper. So we do have a little bit of that color mixing in with the yellow and the green, but we don't have a whole lot of it. You can control it. This piece of mixed media Heavystock here is 4 1/4 inches by 5.5 inches, and I will be trimming it down 1/4 inch from each side. So even what you see here, we're not going to be having all of this on our final project. I'm still concentrating on the Sweet Treat as well as the Summer Garden ink. This step can be done as many or as few times as you want, just until you get the look that you're going for. Now you can see that my ink is starting to stain my mat. I actually clean my media mat by just spraying some bleach spray on it, let it sit for a little bit, and it totally comes out nice and clear afterwards. So if you're finding that your mat is staining, that might be the solution for you. So once we have our background done, I will let that completely dry. We can set that to the side so that is ready for when we're ready to create our card together. But we create such a unique background with this because of the mat that we're working on, and because we're using interference inks, we get little pockets of shimmer on that background that make it such a beautiful background. Now, one of the other ways that I like to use my interference inks is playing around with it on black and gray. Sometimes I'll use black and white cardstock, so you can see that I have some black and white cardstock here. Other ways that I like to use it is by using black or gray ink. So here I have some Hickory Smoke Distress ink. I'm putting it on the centers of my white flowers here, my white die cuts, as well as my leaf die cuts here. I'm also going to be using some of the black soot on there to add that dark color tone to it so that we can see both properties of the interference ink. Now, one thing that every once in a while I get a comment on is someone saying that their ink or their black ink they're putting underneath their interference inks is smearing. I don't have that problem. However, I keep my gray and my black pads fairly dry. It's much easier to add extra ink to whatever you're putting your inks on than it is to take it off. So I keep my pads fairly dry and it dries really, really quick. I also don't have any problems with those inks blending or bleeding underneath my interference inks. I also work fairly quick when I'm doing the interference inks on top of them. So again, I don't have that problem with it. Now, if I were to say, take these papers and do the distress style background that I was just doing that had a lot of moisture to it, yes, that would rehydrate the black and the gray ink. Then it would start to blend and start to run because it would rehydrate that ink. But just blending on top of these die cuts, I don't have that problem. I'm going to start off with the Tropical Paradise ink pad. This one here has a nice bright pink on white or light cardstock. On black or dark cardstock, we get a bluey purpley color. So on those black die cuts, we're seeing that bluey purpley color. When you first put that ink down, you'll see a touch of that pink, but it'll absorb into the cardstock. On my white die cut, you see just the pink. On my flower there that has the gray and black ink blending in there, you see a combination of those two. So that is exactly the same ink pad, but we see completely different colors on it because of what is underneath it. So again, here with the die cut, we have the pink around the outside edges because we didn't have any black and gray ink on there. For the center, we see that purpley blue color of the interference. For the next die cuts here, I'm using the Sweet Treat. So this one here on white and light cardstock is going to show up a nice bright yellow. On black or dark cardstock, we're going to see that pinky colored interference to it. So on the white here, we're going to see that yellow. On the center of this flower die cut where we put the black and the gray ink, we're going to see more of that pink interference. And I used the gray and the black because it creates a little bit more of an even transition. It's not quite as dramatic as just using the black, but you certainly could if you want it. Just know that if you just use the black, it creates a really dramatic effect to it. I would suggest trying it with just the gray, trying it with just the black, and then trying it with a combination and seeing which way way you like best, because neither one is right or wrong. They just create different looks. For those leaves, I'm going to start with doing a little bit of Sweet Treat at the tips of the leaves. Then I'm going to go in with the Summer Garden on the rest of the die cut. So on the white parts of the leaves, we're going to blend into that yellow. So we're going to get a combination of that green with that yellow ink on there. On the areas that have the gray and the black ink blending underneath it, we're going to see more of the blue properties to the Summer Garden ink pad. So on white or light cardstock, we see green. On black or dark cardstock with this ink pad, we see blue. So again, like two different ink pads. So we have three different ink pads here, but when we look at the final project, you're going to see that it looks like we have a lot more colors than we did simply because we used black cardstock in some areas and black ink on the white cardstock in other areas. So it creates more colors. These are also really fun to just use on black. You get a completely different look, and it's just fun to have the options that you have with these ink pads. I think they're just great to create with and to play with. For the mat for this card, I have a piece of black cardstock here that I'm trimming to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And I just wanted to mention that I use my interference inks a ton I've done a ton of videos with them. So I do have a playlist where I have all the videos that use interference ink. So if you're looking for more inspiration with different die cuts or different stamps or whatnot, you'll find that there. And you can also use them in your Better Press system as well. Now I'm trimming my inky background and I'm taking 1/4 inch off of each side. The final measurement is going to be 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. So you see by trimming that down, we don't have as much of the pink on there as we had initially. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of extra texture to that background. So I have this Weather Grid stamp set. I am going to use both stamps. I'm going to use the one that it has a little bit more lines in it that are a little bit closer together. I'm going to be using that one with the Hickory Smoke Distress Pad. Now this is just to add a little bit of extra texture, a little bit of extra interest to the background. I am using the Hickory Smoke with this one. I'm going to use the Black Soot with the other one to tie in with the black and the gray that we have on our die cuts. You could also use these with those interference pads if you wanted to add a little bit of line detail or texture or color with those ink pads on that background. I didn't even bother grabbing a acrylic block. I'm just using my fingers on the stamp. It sticks to my fingers. It's got enough stickiness to it. The other thing with using it with your hands is you can make sure not to get a complete image for the background. You can just stamp a little bit at a time and have a little bit more of an organic look to it. It really just depends, again, on the look that you're going for. I didn't want a complete stamped image of each one of these. I just wanted to add that little bit of a hint of texture to the background, not covering it fully, just adding a little bit. And when I do add texture to the background with things like this, I'll typically do it in odd numbers. So that black one, I put it in 3 places. The gray one, I think I put it actually in 4 places, but because it's a lot lighter, you can get away with a little bit more with that one. For the mat for this card, I'm using that Tropical Paradise pad around the outside edges. This way, my mat is going to match perfectly with my die cuts. I don't have to go and find a cardstock color that might possibly work with these because they are such unique pads. By using the interference pad itself, it matches absolutely perfectly. And you can do the same with white cardstock underneath with the interference pad on top. I do that regularly as well. But because this card here has some of those black accents there, it's a really nice way to frame it in. I'm going to add this to my A2 card base. I'm just using Barely Art glue to glue everything together. I use this to glue most things together because liquid glue gives you that wiggle room to move and shimmy things in place, and then it's stuck there for good. So I do love using the liquid glue. By having it in a fine line bottle, it works perfectly for gluing tiny die cuts as well, but it works great for adhering cards in this way too. Now I want to add a little bit of extra dimension to my flower, so I'm using my fingers to curl the petals. You could do the same thing with the leaves as well, but for this card, I only do it for the petals. I'll add the glue to the center part of the flower, and then I'll just press it in that center to make sure that everything sticks together well. This is just, again, an easy way to add that little bit of extra dimension, and I love the little bit of dimension it gives. Now, I don't bother putting anything under those petals, but you certainly could put some foam pop dots underneath there if you felt like you needed to support that dimension, especially if you're mailing it. If you're putting this into an envelope to mail, it would flatten that out. I would be hand delivering a card like this that had that little bit of dimension to it. Now, like I said, for my leaves, I didn't add the dimension to it. I'm just going to glue them down flat. I think there's enough dimension in just that flower alone, but I am going to put the glue on the back of there. There's other flower and branch die cuts in this set that you could use as well, but I didn't want to cover too much of our background with them, so I opted not to use them. Now, when it comes to putting the second leaf down, I have it kind of crisscrossed on my card. The flower is nice and large. It's going to cover everything that we don't necessarily want to see. So it doesn't need to be perfect underneath there. So we're going to add the flower to it, and then I'm going to add the smile sentiment. The smile is from this die set. If it's too large for you, you could choose a different die or a different sentiment from a different set, and that would work as well. For this card, I opted to put it towards the top of the card. Another great place would be to put it kind of covering the bottom part of the flower, but I would then add a little bit of dimension to the end part of the ILE for that smile sentiment, just to give that some support because it is an uneven surface there. To add just a touch more texture, I use some Stickles on the center part of the flower. This one doesn't have any color to it. It just has some iridescent shine to it. So it's just going to add a little bit of extra texture to the center of that flower. And here we have a beautiful card using several different super easy ink techniques with those interference inks. But because we've used black cardstock as well as white cardstock and black and gray ink with it, it looks like we have a larger color palette than we actually do, which is kind of a neat magic trick. You'll find all of the supplies that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. And even though this was a super quick and easy card to create, it doesn't look it because using the interference inks takes it to the next level, as well as using them in several different ways with different cardstocks and different inks. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.